Will you be committed to your great-grandchildren? God willing, you live long enough to see that generation. Nowadays, 70, 80 years old is yesterday's 25. So you're going to, let's hope we all live to be 120. As I say in Yiddish, das Leben bis 120. Moses did it, we can do it. So that's the reality, that we have to be considerate. Again, it's a systemic approach. Everything impacts everything else. We have to think in those terms, not just I do this because I want to have this experience with this one person. We're going to go off. We're going to build something. Often people have good families, but there's no what's called bridging capital. By that I mean you can have a good family. I know people have good families who don't go beyond the good family to someone else. In other words, they've isolated themselves as the good family, and we're just going to get it together in our scene, and there doesn't no bridge to another family. Same thing, you can have bridging cultures. You have to have a culture that not only seeks well-being, but also seeks well-being in connecting to other cultures, bridging capital, so to speak, social capital, as well as monetary capital. So the question is, if we're going to contribute to a healthy community, what does a healthy community look like? Everybody needs community. You realize that? We all need community. We either get a bad one or a good one, or we isolate ourselves. When I was growing up, I didn't understand that. You go to Hebrew school, you get bar mitzvah, and from what I understand, a huge number of Jewish kids like myself, after they get bar mitzvah at 13 years old, never have anything to do with the Jewish life at all after that. Now, that's a dilemma for the Jewish community to figure out, wait a second, what are we doing to our kids where half of them don't continue after they're 13 years old? There has to be a plan, there has to be structures, there has to be something that makes it joyful, meaningful, purposeful for those young kids. If they're not getting that, of course they're going to go whatever, media, man, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Broadway? They experience something exciting, then they're going to go in the synagogue, they're not going to do that. So unless they have structures that help draw out that creative potential, and they hear language that allows them to understand their nature, their purpose, and their value. If not, they split. And the same thing, the idea of kids when they're 18, well, as soon as I'm 18, I'm going to take off, get myself a car, and I'm going. Well, okay, that's interesting, but what about the connectedness to the family? And if you meet somebody that you want to marry, is the family involved at all? You're thinking about grandchildren? Where are they going to fit into this whole thing? I mean, that's who we are. We are going to impact those generations. So we're not thinking about that, and we don't do anything about it. And then you find disconnect between families, between generations, and that becomes a tragedy of culture. You have people spinning alone, even in terms of planning for cities. We'll have one lecture on sustainability. We build cities so that older people are living in the suburbs, just cased away in a nice house with nobody else to talk to. No public furniture, no place to come. In Europe, you have all these wonderful squares and plazas where people are sitting, playing chess or bocce ball or whatever, talking, sitting, young people, old people. And many of our elderly people are just alone. And that's a tragedy. Every age of life, there's no, what my age, there's no retirement from life. We're always here for someone there. We're always in touch of our own value. We have to grow our heart, no matter how old we are, and that keeps us alive. From what I've read, dementia happens to many people because they just stop. They stop reading, they stop relating, and then there's the potential for that breakdown. So it's necessary until they put us in the box, and maybe even in the spirit world we have to keep working. Who knows? So the importance of contributing to a healthy community is necessary. There are many books talking about, there's a first place, your home, and then there's the office or where you work. Well, there's a need for a third place, if you've ever heard that expression. More and more books use that expression. Where's the third place? The reason I think Starbucks has made it so big, it's the third place. People can come and as they share, they encourage you, they never chase you away. You can sit there and drink a cup of coffee for 8 hours and you'll still be wired, They figured it out. They got a third place. We all need that. And it has to be, but it has to be genuine community. I'm not sure how much community is established by sitting in Starbucks and doing your thing. We have to have community based on value, purpose, on who we are, on being creative in a community. If a religious group doesn't offer those things, it dies. If a social group doesn't offer those things, it dies. You know, my dad, God bless his soul, used to belong to the Brajana Young Men's Benevolent Association. People from Europe who came from the same small town, came to New York. I never knew anybody in that organization was under 80 or 70, you know, but it was the Brajana Young Men's Benevolent Association. But at least they went out every month. 20 families went out to different activities because they all belonged to that, you know, they were spread out to New Jersey, New York, whatever. But it was so important to them for those 20 couples to get together every month and share about their children and hardships. Oh, my daughter, you can't believe it. My son, oh, he doesn't go home. He's got beer to the floor. And I mean, they talked about all these things. But it brought comfort, it brought insight, it brought wisdom, joy. At the end of life, there should be some wisdom to give to others, you know, or some experiences that were worthwhile. Let's call it that. So that's why, again, with education, we need to constantly work at that so that it never stops, working at the empathic nature, working at the intellectual nature, working at the spiritual nature. You know, it's interesting that even big corporations like Google are having people come in. John Cabot, Zinn, who developed, he's written a number of books on mindful meditation. So they invite them in. So at least there's some element of that coming into even the marketplace. So human excellence involves the goal of persons of good character who can build those good families, do that good work, and contribute to the community. So it involves, again, respect for the self and respect for others. Many people who have not developed that self, it's very difficult for them then to offer that self to others. This insecurity, fear, all these other things prevent us from reaching out. Well, they won't like me. They won't love me. They don't like the way I look. Whatever it is, if we spent as much time in relationship to others as we do in front of the mirror, we would have incredible social relations. I mean, it's amazing. When I say that virtue is the ordering of love, again, it's this classic standard, you know, prudence, temperance, justice, fortitude, faith, hope, and love. What do those things mean? Prudence, making good choices. Temperance, self-control. Fortitude, courage. Justice, fairness. And then faith, hope, and love mean you have a purpose. Now, nobody can tell you what your purpose is. If you believe that you can be a great musician, you have to have faith in that. His belief means faith and the hope that you can do it and using your love energy, putting yourself behind it. So those are not crazy virtues. In other words, the same virtues necessary in education are using that power of love in ways that you become a full person. You know, we teach kids to self-control. We teach them how to manage their emotions. And we'll talk a moment about social-emotional learning. Kids don't often realize what they're feeling. And they often don't realize what they're doing. So it's necessary for parents, teachers, and others, mentors in the community, to help them realize, you look like you're really angry. I'm not angry. You know, well, you sound like you're angry. No, I'm not angry at all. Children have to realize, okay, so you seem to be feeling uncomfortable. How does whatever you're feeling, does it make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? Well, I'm really not comfortable at all. Well, what's happening? How are you interpreting this? And kids have to look at, you know, how they're telling themselves what kind of stories, what's going on inside, and then be sensitive how to relate to others. How can we help others feel more valuable and more precious, things like that? That's the only option, given the principal framework. So we have a responsibility for making good choices. Can't escape it. We can feel guilty, bad, all kinds of other things. Say, well, yeah, religion and other things just make me feel guilty and bad. Well, what's making you feel guilty and bad? Well, you keep saying I have to care for others and love others and all this. I'd rather not do that. Okay, you're choosing not to do it. Of course you're going to feel bad. It's not religion that's making you feel bad. It's responsibility that's making you feel bad. You know, if you're married, husband, wife, You know, your son, now 3, or your daughter-in-law, have a new child. From what I remember, the first 4 months, you don't think you're going to sleep through the night. So what happens? You can say, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're tired. Honey, will you go and pick up the child? This child is crying. What are you talking about? That's your job. I mean, if you do that, it's all over with soon. You have to be able to do those things, sacrifice when it's hard. If sacrifice was easy, everybody would be doing it all the time. But that's why we have to work at that as children. You have to have children take on tasks. They have real things to do. They got to wash the dishes and take out the garbage, and they got to do those things. So you can relax and watch the football game. Well, they have to learn they have real responsibility as children. They're part of the family, part of the team. And they have to learn this from the earliest ages. Kids can learn to write thank you notes to their parents. They can say things that are pleasing to their parents. They can act with kindness and love. That's a discipline. It doesn't happen by pouring water over them. It doesn't happen naturally as sort of they'll flower. And it doesn't happen if you yell at them also. Children are very sensitive. You can't just do anything with them and say, well, this is my parents did this to me, I'm going to do it to you. We have to constantly examine. That's why, again, knowledge is so important. Reading, meditating, praying, talking to people who, it's so nice to go to that conference yesterday because what was there is master teachers. Master teachers. It really moved me to see, oh, wow, these people really are master teachers. The session that I went to was one where they drew upon a lot of experience that I didn't have. As a college teacher, you get a PhD and then they put you in a classroom. Good luck. And kids are saying good luck too because they're not going to change. They're just watching you when you fall down. But actually, master teachers are so important because they have such experience and knowledge, and they give resources of books that immediately I'm going, on Amazon to buy this book and so forth. We need master teachers even outside of the classroom. Our parents need to be the first and last master teachers, always. No matter how old the grandchildren are, if my child, 40 years old, has a cold, I immediately call them, and what can I do? It doesn't end. It doesn't end. So, again, developing those virtues is very important. Now, the school, like a family, like a community, has to be a school of love. What else? Want a family of love so that everybody's happy? It's my grandchildren. I took 2 of my daughters to a museum, 2 of my granddaughters to a museum 2 weeks ago. I could have just stood in the car with them. I didn't have to go to the museum. I didn't have to go anywhere. It just feels so good to be among loving children. And, I'll do anything for them. And, even we needed some quarters for the parking meter. And they each had, actually, because of the bar, about 20 quarters each. Say, oh, buy them for me. Oh, no, here's all the quarters. And they put them in the ashtray. Here's kids putting their money in my ashtray, There's a lot of joy in that. Whatever, let me get you some coffee for this, whatever. They're just running to do something for you. What else do you want in life? Ain't nothing better than that. So the loving family, but in a similar way, culture of love in the school. I mentioned my mottos, the ultimate measure of success, acts of loving kindness. That's what studying history is about. It's what English is about. Why study any of this stuff if it doesn't help build a loving, caring culture? So the school has got to embody the same qualities as the home. Same thing in the community. If your kids go to the Boys and Girls Club or they stay after school with various clubs, same quality. This young man here has got a head of the Performing Arts Department. Performing Arts Department has got to raise up children to enjoy the greatness of music, art, plays, theater, things like that. Wherever they go, children need coherence. The world has got to stick together for them. So the same signals they get at home, the same signals they get in their family, same signals they get in the Boys and Girls Club or the arts and the Performing Arts Department, then the world makes sense to them. It coheres. It sticks together. If kids are not getting the same signal, especially even the friends that parents have, children are looking about those friends. And if the world sticks together for them and makes sense, especially during the early years from preschool through middle school, they either develop a moral core or they don't develop that moral core. And if they don't, there's problems because the peer groups that they'll connect with in high school are not the positive peer groups, they're the destructive peer groups. So it's important to give that foundation so that kids know I am solid. So the signals then have got to be the same because the signals of the larger culture will knock out almost anybody. I mean, what are they going to watch, see? You know, what are they going to do with the larger culture that's looking to develop their character, develop their power of love, care, and so forth? Kids have got to make sense of their world, and therefore the great responsibility of every institution and culture, that's the whole series of these lectures, has the responsibility of developing that heart, that character, that well-being of the child and then of the adult. We need it too. When we go into a store or we want to go somewhere, we want people to be friendly and caring. I was in Russia while communism still dominated that country. And you go into a restaurant, it's sort of like New York. Maybe I'll use New York as an example. You go to New York, excuse me, waiter, can you tell me what time it is? No, it's not my table. You know, in other words, in Russia, the same thing. They had no motivation to really welcome you in and say, what would you like and all that. They're getting paid, presumably the same thing, or they didn't get any training. McDonald's at least has a university. McDonald's University tells you how to be friendly and warm as people come in, you know, you really embrace them. They had to learn that. They had a discipline to learn that. You just can't give people a job as a waiter or waitress. In Europe, you know, the professionalism of waiters is extraordinary. It's really a profession there. Just like in countries like Finland and South Korea, teachers are a profession. In Finland, from the books I've read about Finland and their education, under doctors, the most respected people in that culture are teachers. So there's a lot of teacher training. They won't let you even sit in the classroom unless you have a master's degree and have mastered certain areas of teaching. There's no substitute for those kind of things. So academic excellence. So besides from the principle, norm, culture of love, the classroom, the school itself, the larger culture, every institution has got to provide the foundation by which kids can develop the strengths within. And it's a constant and never-ending discipline. A content-rich curriculum is necessary. You know, kids, again, it's a common-sense philosophy of education. Kids learn on the foundation of what they know. So at every grade level, there are things to know. If kids, for example, we've learned, and so many books and articles have pointed out, when children come into preschool, let's say they're a single parent who may love them and so forth, they come to preschool with a vocabulary of about 650 words. Another child whose parents take them to museums or talk to them when they go to the grocery store, they don't just whack them on the bottom and be quiet. They talk to them, explain things and this and that. Those kids come into preschool with a vocabulary of something like 2,500 words. The gap gets bigger as they get older. It doesn't get smaller. That's why it's so important, the foundation of the family. And, you know, in our preschool, we have 30 kids, and we have 5 or 6 teachers. We only need, according to the law, 1 teacher for 12 kids. Why all these teachers? Actually, for our school, we have 135 kids, and we have 29 people on our staff. Like, what's happening? We see that it's very important for children to have conversations with older people. They need to talk to others, especially, thank God, you know, San Leandro is an immigrant community. We have parents from 29 different countries in our school. So a lot of the kids who come don't have the foundation of English as a native language. We have to make extra effort because we know the importance of words and language and helping kids develop. And especially once that gap gets bigger, it's very hard. If you look at the results in yesterday's paper of the testing, even though as a nation we've gone up a little in 8th grade reading and 8th grade math, for certain groups, it hasn't gone up at all. So look at the reality as we all know what those groups are. And it's very important to supplement what they get. That's why some countries where there's extra child care, very important. And then President Obama's talked about a rich education for preschool for every kid in the country. Very, very important. Myself, I've come to see that early childhood education is the most important kind of education that I can be involved with. So families and community have to support what's happening in the school. Another experience I had last week, a member of this community is an administrator in a fairly large public school near here. We talked about our school. He says, a lot of problems with discipline. What kind of problems? He tells me when kids get into a fight, for example, and the parents are asked to come to the school, parents support the kid. They say, if somebody hit you, hit him back. That's the philosophy. Well, of course, somebody hit you, you hit him back. Rather than a different set of principles, well, wait a second. Do we want violence to be the result of this? I mean, look at what's happening with nations. It's exactly the same thing. So they don't share those fundamental principles that allow for how do you resolve conflict. We have peace educators from our kids here, but more than that, again, if you look at social emotional learning, students have to become aware of when they're feeling angry.